suburb.
Yes. Good morning. Today is Monday, August 26th. It is 10:03 a.m. I am John Kafalis, Commissioner District 1, Chair Pro Tem. I am joined by Commissioner Steve Johnson. Welcome, Commissioner Johnson. It's always a pleasure to be here with you. And
Thank you.
Commissioner Donnelly is excused. Today we have the work session regarding the 2019. Are we good?
Yeah, I'm just noticing that the microphones are now amplifying in the room for the first time since I have been here.
Interesting. Great. Then I'll be able to hear things. So we are here for the work session to discuss the 2019-2023 strategic plan. In addition to the two commissioners present, I mentioned that the chair, Commissioner Donnelly, is excused. We have Larimer County Manager Linda Hoffman, and then we have some folks here, and I'll let you folks begin and introduce yourselves and present.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Lori Cadridge, and I'm the Interim Director for Community Planning and Infrastructure Resources.
Good morning, Heather. I'm here with Human Services and the Goal Steward for Goal 2.
Bridget Paris, and I'm the Goal Steward for Goal 3 and the HR Director.
Great, thank you. And we're also here, we have in the Commissioners' Conference Room, we have the Assistant County Manager, Lorinda Volker. We have our Facilities Director, Ken Cooper. We have Shelley Bay from our Public Health and Environment. Helping in
one of the strategic
the count, yes,
and the county ESA.
and one of our esteemed assistant county attorneys,
David Ayer.
Welcome, David, and of course Tom Clayton, a part of our public information team. So, with that said, I'm not sure who wishes to begin, but we're really glad you're here and look forward to getting an update on the various goals regarding our strategic plan.
I'd like to begin, Commissioner, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Thank you. We are here for a quarterly update of the strategic plan, and just for the vast listening audience, Larimer County approaches a strategic plan a little differently than some other organizations of our type, in that we try to make sure that it is strategic and a plan. So instead of writing very broad goals and objectives that are difficult to ascertain whether or not you've achieved your objective, Larimer County takes a different approach in that the commissioners went through a lengthy process to identify 3 important goals for the future of our community, and they are centered on the idea that, according to the State Demographer's Office, our community is going to grow quite notably in the next, I think, couple of decades. We will get to about 500,000 people, which is a 44% increase. So in keeping with that, the first goal was developed to make sure that our public infrastructure is ready to support that larger population. The second goal deals with our programs and services to address not only a larger population, but a changing and evolving population. And then thirdly, we can't just do things the same way that we've always done them. Our own government organization will need to evolve and mature in order to meet those service demands. So the 3 goal stewards that are heading this effort have done exemplary work under the support of the executive leadership of the commissioners. So today we're going to go over progress. I think that there are some specific questions that will come before you looking for some direction. And the only other thing I want to say is, wow, what all of the goal stewards, what all of the executive sponsors, what each of the objective leaders and team members have done in this short period of time since these objectives were developed is truly extraordinary. And I think that they set us up well for the future as we work through this 5-year cycle of achieving our objectives. So thank you for your work, and I will turn it over to each of you to give your updates. And You want to start with goal number 1 or goal? I feel a little bit like the old "let's make a deal." Do we want to do the?
So we were debating whether it should be door number 1, since
Uh-huh.
door number 1 has not been here before, or should
Okay.
it be door number 3?
Okay.
So then I can model her
All right.
behavior.
All right.
And we really believe Heather should go last.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So
All right.
it
I'll
sounds
find-
like Bridget,
Yep.
you are up. So Bridget Paris is our goal steward for the internal goal, and I believe Commissioner Johnson is the executive sponsor.
Correct. So, again, our goal is internal focused. Our first objective is with space reduction in the facilities master plan. Ken is our objective leader for that, and he had one of our first deadlines to work towards, which was June of 19. And we are working towards providing staff workspaces to reduce the square footage needs of the county. It is deemed to be a little bit bigger project than what we were able to accomplish in June. Currently, we're working on getting, and when I say we, it's actually Ken and his team. I'm just getting updates and helping facilitate the process. We're working on getting as much of an accurate picture of allocated square footage. It is a much more daunting task than you would believe it to be, with shared meeting room spaces and department allocations. So they are in the progress of finishing that up. They have done a good presentation to Linda on strategies for reducing space and what opportunities departments can look at when they have those changes come into play. The other part of that space reduction is that there is a request process in place when departments need to make changes for space or office that has a certain dollar threshold that requires a review and approval that allows them to work through these other strategies and to authorize or not authorize certain changes on how it fits going forward with our plan. So that's kind of the sub-component with the larger facilities master plan, which is underway. The component of the objective for that is approving funding sources. And I know you're aware of the half-penny sales tax that is going forward that has a large component of funding for our facilities master plan. I'm going to peek back at Ken real quick and see if you have anything else to add. If you do, you'll have to come up, though, so we can hear you.
And while you're coming up, Ken, I might ask, does this include the Justice Center, future space needs in the Justice Center? And have you found any abilities to be more, I guess, efficient, maybe isn't exactly the right word, but get any more use out of that space than we're currently getting?
I'll answer that second part real quickly on the
Mr.
Justice
Cooper,
Center.
would you identify
I'm
yourself
sorry.
for the
Yeah.
thousands of people that are listening?
Sorry. Ken Cooper, Facilities Director. To answer your question, Commissioner, the focus primarily for our team has been on this building because the master plan calls for this building to actually require reduced space per square foot or person, square foot per person in a 10-year window. The longer-term plan for the building is to have a separate services building built, and so the early version emphasis of our team was to find ways to reduce back in this building, and so we've done quite a lot of calculations specific to that, 5-year, 10-year, and 15-year windows of time that we expect, where that reduction would have to get get us, further out into the future. But we're anticipating, and part of what Bridget mentioned, the extra effort that's going into it now to make sure those calculations are consistent is going to the other buildings, and we have a meeting tomorrow to go through some of that. It's been a couple of extra weeks of doing some data and making sure it reconciles with the information that we get from HR and from other groups, IT, that all play a part in onboarding and things like that. So we anticipate that once we get a good firm handle on what we've got in this building, and then again spread across those other buildings, that we can take the the strategies that we're allowing for and suggesting that groups and different department heads can adopt within their group to try to save some space, that could be applied, elsewhere, including the Justice Center potentially. That one's trickier maybe because, the relationship with the state is not what it would be, internal to the county. But it is it's certainly a desire,
When you said build a future service building, what is in a service building?
Sorry. Basically, the plan calls for the public-facing teams that are in this building, the commissioner's office, assessor's office, treasurer, groups like that, that would remain here. And in roughly a 10-year window, the groups that do not have that focus, IT, HR, facilities, groups like that could move and provide that to a new building.
Okay.
The struggle, of course, is going to be that we've got hundreds of millions of dollars of future capital called out in the master plan, and that's a component of that. And whether the county in a 10-year window would be able to get to that, we're kind of thinking our way through that, anticipating that we may not get there in a 10-year window, or likely would not get there in a 10-year window. What then, right? And so that's a piece of it as well. So,
is there any possibility of the expansion of the Justice Center housing some of those services? Because I assume when we build the expansion of the Justice Center, you want to have it a little bit bigger than just going to be filled immediately, right? So there might be some space that they wouldn't need, or have we gotten that detailed with the Justice Center? Do we want to move probation back in? Have we figured all that out?
yes, in the facilities master plan, the two primary, the two buildings with the most focus were the jail improvement project as well as the Justice Center. Those two allowed for and included a much deeper dive into the detail, much more detailed programming that was included in those two projects. To answer your question, yes, the groups that are currently, or that, probation being, vacated here soon, they would be included and brought back into the fold in an expanded Justice Center. So the co-location that would happen at that building included the criminal justice components. It did not include, though, additional services groups like HR or others like that. That was not part of the early planning. Not that it couldn't be, but that wasn't part of what those early discussions included. So,
did you mention IT as one of the groups that might move out? Would that be difficult with all of the hardware equipment they have?
Not like it used to be. That used to be a huge deal. Moving a data center in the old days, I think, was $1 million kind of minimum. And it's. The equipment is much different now. The connectivity is much different. All those kind of things have reduced the importance of keeping them put. So it isn't. It's not a showstopper like it would have been 15 years ago.
Okay, interesting.
Well,
Thank
and
you.
I think one of the unique components is Ken is going to continue to update that master plan and has
Thank you.
a cyclical process to do that. So
Yeah.
a lot of the challenges that we'll face or opportunities we find, we can continue to address rather than having that standard plan.
Yeah.
Like with our strategic plan,
Yeah.
we are going to continue to work it in pieces and modify and adjust as necessary on what we learn and as it goes. So
Yeah.
I think your schedule, I don't know your schedule exactly.
Yeah,
You can share.
yeah, we're going to be kicking that off in 2020 for a formal update to the plan, and thank you for bringing that up, Bridget. And we'll do it almost all internally. We don't need to go back, and have an outside source, position us that way. The model that we used and that was created for our original master plan is one that's updatable, without heavy, spending. It'll require a good amount of time, of course, internally, but mostly it's being this recent. The information was primarily gathered for the master plan in 2017, so it will be 3 years old by then. So there'll be some change to it, and that's good. We expect that. Some will have gone where it becomes a bigger deal, and some maybe where it's reduced back a little bit for what was called out and what what the needs were. But the beauty of that, going through that every roughly 2.5 to 3 years, on a formal basis going forward, is like Bridget said, it gives us a good handle on adjusting along the way and on the fly, and we can mesh that with, the financial constraints and, other opportunities that, that may come up, other business needs that may come up, all those kinds of things would be something that, that would surface during that process. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for those questions, Commissioner Johnson. One that I would add is, at this time, pending the outcome of the proposed half-penny proposal, are you looking at various scenarios in terms of objective number 1, for example, which deals with figuring out how we can use the current space, especially in this building, as efficiently as possible? So the question is, are you looking at different scenarios?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Again, the focus of the objective team thus far has been to find a way to scale back with a host of different options for. Am I getting to your question?
I think so.
With a host of different options, we don't want to have it be a kind of a one-size-fits-all approach. We'd much rather give people, give department heads a host of things that they can select from. And that includes, potentially, office sharing. It includes reducing workspace, which, can always happen. But that's probably the most difficult one, in
But
terms
certainly
of.
figuring out the details of
Yeah.
all that is very
Right. contingent
contingent upon if we present something to the voters in November regarding the half-penny proposal.
I think that the intention of this objective is to be efficient with the use of space regardless. Because whether we are building new facilities or not, we should not be wasteful. And so if we are using more space than we really need, that's the first thing that we should look at. We should look at the efficient use of all space, whether it is a new facility or an existing facility. We're going to work toward densifying the use of our space as we move more to electronic storage of documents, for example, as we move towards more remote workers. Maybe if we have somebody who's out of the office more often than they're in the office, maybe they need a different kind of workspace for when they are here. So we want to use our space efficiently, whether it's new space or existing space.
Thank you. Bridget, do you wish to speak to the second objective at this time?
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks.
The second objective is moving along. It's in progress and on target. They also had a June deadline. Essentially, looking at what we believe will be needed in our future workforce at the end of this strategic plan and beyond, establishing what those characteristics would be of our workforce. That was the first step. The second step is then to use those characteristics through the different items identified in the objective. So the traits have been established. There are 3 traits that this group has identified, being adaptable, collaborative, and inclusive. Those 3 traits, now that they have been identified, are going to be presented to SLC and reviewed, and the team is also working on how we would measure those. They're looking through a few different strategies to do that, including partnerships over at UNC. I went to UNC. Over at CSU. And other strategies for measuring, people characteristics. So that one is moving along well.
Thank you, Bridget. A quick question on my part is regarding the characteristic, the inclusive characteristic. Is that also looking outwardly? In other words, how we provide, I guess that's the issue, right? How we provide customer service in a way that it's as inclusive as possible or culturally sensitive as possible. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's going to be a characteristic of our employees. So if we are working to build an employee's characteristic, when we can say that employee is inclusive, the way that they are going to deliver their customer service ideally will be including, will be to include that inclusive behavior. So it's the characteristic of an individual.
Thank you. And one last point on this, and that is that my the person who was interning with me during the summer prepared an issue brief on this topic of inclusion and some of the best practices based on some of the preliminary research that she did. I'm in the process of reviewing that document, and I would like to be able to share that with you. It might be helpful in terms of your deliberations.
I know Christine would like to have that and share it with the objective team.
Very good. Thank you.
Objective 3, I am still the interim director. I did get a volunteer this last month, so I am excited about that, but I want to make sure it's good with that individual supervisor before I spill the beans. So my fingers are crossed that I will be able to hand that over soon. This objective is service delivery, and the goal of the objective is to identify a service in each service category that we can adapt to meet the changing demographics of that service by the end of the goal. This objective team is now divided into 5 smaller teams. Each of those 5 smaller teams have attended the service category meetings with each of their assigned services to begin to identify a large list of services that could be adapted to meet those changing demographics. So they are in that process. Our goal is to have the services identified, ideally November, but by end of the year would be good. So that's where they're at. They're back and forth to those service category meetings and making those contacts.
Thank you, Bridget. Commissioner Johnson, do you have any questions?
I do not.
Okay.
Good.
Right along.
Perfect. Shelley, do you want to come up? Our last one, we actually need your support to move forward. And so there's a second sheet of paper that has Shelley's name across the top and some information from Steve. We have on that last objective essentially what we're hoping met a large portion of that. That objective is for environmental responsibility, and it says, and it's internally focused, so it's for Larimer County as a business, not as focusing on Larimer County and the community. However, we, in this objective, said write a policy and create policy awareness for environmental responsibility. The team has already completed the policy, and so we would start on awareness, and then we would quickly achieve that objective. That was not enough for this objective team. The objective team wanted to actually implement, work on strategies within the county, examples including purchasing, including recycling, different current operations that we do that would reinforce and support that policy. So we have 2 asks of you today, one of which is modify the objective language that includes this team moving forward to actually work on implementation of a policy as well as awareness. And then part 2 is get your initial stamp for us to continue with the policy as it is. We will have to have it formally approved, so you're not approving here, but just your go-ahead and initial comments on this policy. So front side is the objective, and back side is the policy language. It is obviously in draft form here, so you can see comments or suggestions. We just would like your support to be able to bring this policy to you officially. We can send it out, obviously, electronically for you to additionally review. Shelley, do you have any other comments?
Shelley, for the record, please identify yourself.
Shelley Berdivola, I'm with engineering. I'm the team lead for this objective, and I'm the staff liaison for the Environmental and Science Advisory Board. So yeah, the team is well on its way to moving this forward. They've worked quickly as far as putting together the policy. They, as Bridget said, recognized the fact that the current objective as worded didn't give departments any mechanism with which to implement the policy. And in meeting with department heads, I heard from them that they would like to have an implementation plan, not just a policy out there. They'd like some direction on how to actually implement the plan. So That's why our team has looked to update that objective to include that as part of their task.
Thank you, Shelley.
Yeah.
Commissioner Johnson, any questions or insights?
I agree with what they said. I think the restating the language makes it clear that it's Larimer County leading by example, and adding the language in of implementation, I think is a good idea as well. I think there's several suggestions on that second page that I like all of them. But, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the only, with regard to the policy, statement 2.
It doesn't say implementation, does it?
No, but I think one of the comments was perhaps a timeline and a manner for evaluation of whether or not the performance of departments, that timeline, whether or not that should be done every 2 years, every 5 years with the strategic planning process. That's something that I think is kind of hanging out there that needs to be resolved before this policy is.
And Shelley, would part of this process include developing the metrics that you would use in order to
Yeah.
determine, like for example, number 2 on the policy,
Right.
establish measurable objectives for evaluating. So you would look at what metrics make sense to
Right.
be able to evaluate if the departments are achieving whatever objectives are established.
Right, and that could be dependent on the department, or it could be dependent on the objectives. And so that would be part of the implementation plan. That would be laid out in that plan.
So the implementation plan would have a handful of objectives and associated time periods that we're working to achieve. Similar to what we're doing with the strategic plan, we would have that environmental responsibility, implementation plan. And we'd work through those. They'd have time periods associated with them. The uniqueness to this is there's not dedicated resources to this. And so one of the strategies that we met with Linda is that we hope if we can win this DOLA intern, that we would be able to use the DOLA intern to help with some of this build and some of the facilitation, and recreate a team. We're still working on the strategy about how that's going to look, but once you have a policy, you can do a plan. Once we have a plan, we need to start working with departments to implement it.
I'm happy to take whatever the group's recommendation is on how it should be reevaluated or progress. I mean, it might be good to do it annually upon the anniversary of the implementation plan's adoption.
Okay.
I kind of think if you don't do it at least annually, if you do it every 2 or 5 years, you kind of forget about it.
Right.
It might be a good way to celebrate the anniversary of the adoption of the plan. That would just be one suggestion, but whatever the group thinks. When you get the objectives or the metrics worked out, it might be wise to do it differently than that, but I would say whatever they suggest is fine with me.
Okay.
I would support Commissioner Johnson's suggestion, an annual evaluation once this thing is adopted, and then, of course, if the people that are working on this agree with that, but I think that makes sense. And just to summarize, the change from the current objective is you're just adding some language in particular around implementation, and then you have some new language in the actual policy that was already in place. We've added some other things. Is that correct, Shelley?
Well, the policy's been updated from the original policy quite a bit.
Yeah.
The original policy, I think, was 3 pages long, and it was pretty high level as far
Okay.
as the goals.
The original policy has essentially, it's still active, we haven't
Yeah.
replaced it yet. The proposal is to replace what currently exists from
96.
Yeah. And I think it was updated.
With this policy, so
Yeah.
we would just scrap the current and use this one.
You're good with that, right, Commissioner Johnson? Moving forward on what has been presented? I agree.
Perfect, we'll finish those cleanups and you'll see it back in formal review and approval process.
Thanks for all the hard work.
Okay, thank you.
You
And
skipped
that is
number
my
4.
last one. Is what?
You skipped number 4.
I noticed that.
Oh, I did skip number 4.
I thought, did I miss something?
Nice try, Bridget.
Mark would not be friends with me right now. Good thing he's not here. It's because this one's the hardest one for me to wrap my head around. This is an IT one. The objective is to complete 4 projects to leverage current data analysis techniques and shared software tools. And essentially, we're looking for 4 countywide projects that help us share data and tools and resources to make work easier. They have selected projects. This was hard. This team really, really wants to do all of the projects that they came up with in their list and are very motivated and excited. So for them to get down to 4 was really difficult. The first one is, as they have labeled it, developing and maintenance of a general resident directory. This is more commonly known as addressing. A lot of our residents have their addresses that are used within multiple services of the county, and it becomes very duplicative and redundant for them to have to share that. It's like they're coming to a different business every time they come to us. The next one is a vendor-client compliance repository. And there is some work being done on this, but I don't think we've actually made it successfully. And I know Heather has been involved. This is a sharing of offender information between county services that require a need for that information to do their business. Unified service experience of county services and service recommendations. This is probably the loftiest one that they're grabbing onto. And I don't know how this is going to look in 5 years, but this is one that if I have an excited team and they're willing to try it, we're going to let them go. This is essentially the Amazon concept of county services, where if you utilize a certain service within the county, you could receive a recommendation that you might also need this. And it's a pretty big concept to wrap their hand on, and how to tie those together. Where if I am building a new, and I'm completely making this up, so bear with me. If I'm building a house and I go for a building permit, and I'm filling this out online, it might actually know that I also might need a septic, something from the health department. So that kind of concept, it's big, but we're going to let them try and see what happens. And then the 4th one is a little bit easier to wrap our hands around: standardization of countywide credit card processing. A lot of departments have made contracts or agreements with various vendors for using contracts, and a strategy to consolidate that resource and use it as an entire county instead of having 10 or 15 different ones. Important for you to know is that there will likely, or there is, it's already been submitted, a service proposal to ask for staff and resources to support primarily Project 1 and 2, where we are able to categorize and document current data resources, and then the tool to do that. Each of these little pieces of data can be owned and stored in different places, and essentially we have to figure out what we have and where it's at and how we keep track of it. So it's a pretty big endeavor.
Thank you, Bridget. Commissioner Johnson, anything you'd like to ask? Or
I'm good. Thank you.
just if I may, no offense to the attorneys in the room, but I'm wondering, do you have attorneys on this objective team? Because the way the selected projects are described in this material, they're a little bit hard to understand. And so again, I'm attempting to be humorous as far as having attorneys.
Attorneys are going to
on
help with that?
What's that?
On attorneys, but remember, this is a big group of IT people.
Oh, attorneys, IT people. But if I may, the suggestion for you to consider is whether or not once we make this information available, more available to the public, that we consider maybe asking an attorney or at least a law clerk to translate what these titles of the selected projects actually
Friendly
mean.
translation of projects.
That's
We
what
used to use the term
Let's
Aunt
ask
Edna.
Tom and Michelle instead of the attorneys.
Amanda, I'm good at that too.
No offense, David.
Sorry.
so.
Great. I will work on that.
Please.
I agree, because it's difficult for me to translate them for everyone, as I've learned.
So kind of attorneys and IT folks on the same level. I don't know if that brings in facilities people. Are they in there somewhere too?
Sometimes.
One role I do see for
Anyway,
attorneys,
thank you, Bridget. Enough said.
one role that I do see for attorneys, and I know that the team is quite aware of, is some of this is protected data.
Well,
And
that was-
so making sure that we are increasing efficiency without breaking the rules
Sure.
is really important. And so there will be a role for the attorneys, David, have no fear.
The bells and whistles went off in my head with PII and HIPAA and all that.
Uh-huh.
Exactly.
Yep. And all of the new data rules that have come into play.
And again, for the benefit of the folks that may be listening, the acronyms that our esteemed Assistant County Attorney made, PII is Personal Identifiable Information, and HIPAA, Health Information. Anyway, it has to do with protecting people's health records and making sure that it remains confidential. Thank you.
Good.
Health information.
Portability,
Portability and
Accountability Act.
I believe.
You're good, Commissioner. Thank you, Bridget. Awesome.
Nothing I know.
Oh,
Are you ready to pass now?
Torch handed.
Door number 1 is goal number 1.
number one.
And the first goal for goal number 1, or the first objective, was to have a regional task force that would look at transportation projects. And I know both of you are very familiar with the work of the Regional Transportation Committee, and that we'll have an action before you tomorrow to decide whether or not you wish to move forward a half-penny tax, of which a portion of that would then be available to regional transportation projects, including a portion of that money, if the voters approve it, for transit opportunities. So I don't know if you have any questions about that. I know we've all been working on it, so
I do not have any questions. Thank you.
I would just give a big shout out of thanks to Mark Peterson and his team for coordinating the work of that project team over the last 18 months to get us to where we're at today. And then our second objective is led by Stephen Gillette, and that has to do with improvements for the solid waste infrastructure master plan. And I would highlight a couple of things that have been done recently in terms of the development of the policy committee that was required with all the communities signing the intergovernmental agreements. So we've identified members from each one of the participating agencies, and we're beginning to coordinate our first meeting that should be coming up this fall for the policy committee. In the meantime, we're working with our stakeholder partners in looking at the site, getting ready for the transfer station to be built. We received a proposal for construction and demolition waste for someone to pilot a project on site. And just this last week, we met with purchasing as well as the legal offices to see if that might be an opportunity to begin to pilot some of the future projects for the solid waste facility. And so I believe that everything is on track for that objective as I read it.
I've heard some of the stakeholder group members say they are asked if there was going to be another meeting of the stakeholder members, and I don't really think we need meetings for the purposes of having meetings. Maybe an update email or newsletter, all those folks or something, but if you need direction from them or need feedback from them, maybe it would be a meeting. But I have heard some interest among some of those folks to getting an update of what's going on. I don't know if that's in the plan.
Do you mean the stakeholder group
The big
that
stakeholder
led?
group.
Oh, the big, okay, because we've been meeting with the smaller ones.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think that's what I've heard.
We had talked a little bit by email about sending a letter, and I was thinking of to the smaller groups, but an email or even a written letter to the full stakeholder group
Okay.
is a good idea.
And then our third objective was that we would develop a rural infrastructure strategy that defines the county's role, and it had to do with street reconstruction. As you know, we do not maintain or construct most of the streets in the rural areas. We do have a variety of different agreements with subdivisions, some of whom take care of their own maintenance, some we take care of a portion. And so the intent behind this objective would be to try to either standardize our approach or look at a way that facilities could be maintained. I visited briefly with Todd Juergens and with Mark Peterson regarding this. And our first step in looking at this is to begin to look at it more regionally, because we do believe some of the other communities within the county have a similar situation. And we're wondering if there's a way that we could all work together and approach it in a similar manner. The other portion of this is the broadband services. And I was briefed by Cole Parrott last week regarding the work of the broadband committee, and I believe Lorinda would have a better understanding of the work that's underway. If you'd like some specifics on it, but it's my understanding from Cole that the team is working diligently and moving forward on that project. And then the last portion on this was a long-term planning for water supply and wastewater treatment infrastructure in the unincorporated areas. Cole had not moved forward very far along in that objective. However, I am familiar with some recent planning that's been done related to the City of Fort Collins comprehensive plan that brought together these utility and district providers to look at that in terms of the city's GMA as well as comprehensive planning. And so he's going to follow up to see if there's some data that we can use from that original work and then begin to look at it on a more regional level. I invite any questions you might have.
You know, I know Loveland is also, they're working on the 402 corridor.
Yep.
I know that they have been in communication with Johnstown about an area where both municipalities have long expressed interest. I don't know if they have done service area studies or not, but it would feel like there is at least a possibility that perhaps similar work has been done, at least in that part of South County.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because Mark briefed me on that too, related to some road projects down there, and so I can get that information to Cole and tag both of those up. And then the last objective we had was to complete a regional watershed management effort to improve mitigation efforts for flood-related hazards, water sharing strategies, and then look to improve the B dams. And so kind of these are more implementation efforts related to these objectives. So currently we're underway in purchasing additional monitoring equipment along the river corridors. And we have also been asked to include water mitigation strategies within the land use code update, and so that's been flagged for consideration under that. And then the county has taken the lead on a contract to look at different engineering aspects related to the B dam, so we're working with our partners on that. And I would also ask Linda to share any information that she might have, because she's attended the last meeting related to that topic.
So the commissioners will remember, but perhaps some other members of the audience will not be as familiar. These B dams are old dams that were built as dry dams. So you can see the dam structure, but it's dry even on the upstream side of that. So the purpose of these impoundments is that in a very wet season, water would enter into these areas and be detained behind this dam structure such that it would alleviate flood risk downstream. So when the dams were built a couple of decades ago or so, there was
70s, I think, weren't they?
yeah, there was little development downstream. But as Wellington has developed and Timnath and Windsor, there is now considerably more risk of breach of such dams, in that it was low risk at the time because if the dam failed, you'd just be flooding more farmland. But now the risk is much higher, and so the state engineer's office has reclassified these dams as higher risk, and therefore they need to have more structural integrity. So that's an expensive process to convert the old earthen dams into something that is more durable in the event of a flood. So there is an IGA that is circulating among parties that would fund this first part of the work to do a comprehensive assessment of what needs to be done. And various entities are in the process of reviewing that IGA. It hit a bit of a snag in Wellington, and so there's some additional work being done to make sure that all of the parties to the agreement would sign up for the same language in the IGA so that the project can move forward. The community most at risk is Wellington, followed by, as you go downstream, Timnath and perhaps even Windsor.
Lori, thank you for that information. I'm wondering, as part of this objective on watersheds and you mentioned the B dams, which is part of the Box Elder stormwater district. Are you also keeping in mind the need to resolve the Eastside detention facility? How right now there's an engineering analysis of that, and that ultimately needs to be addressed because the water that's in that detention facility is problematic as far as there might be a need to do augmentation or some other way to resolve that issue that will likely cost money and will require some level of collaboration. I just want to make sure that's part of the scenario.
No.
Why?
That has not been the intention previously, in that these B dams are not part of the Box Elder Stormwater Authority.
Okay.
And so if there is an intention to add an additional portion of this work to do something with Box Elder, that would be quite a change in this objective. There's not a relationship between Box Elder and the B dams.
Well, other than and I appreciate clarifying that, Linda, but these dams are included in the
They're included in the drainage.
area, the
Linda's
Box
talking
Elder
about
drainage.
the authority.
And that's the connection. They're included in the Box Elder drainage area,
Yeah.
which is pretty extensive. So I appreciate the clarification, and I just want to make sure that our community planning and infrastructure and resource services folks are mindful of what is underway. I know Mark Peterson and our county engineers are very involved, Eric Tracy,
Right.
regarding resolving the issue of the Eastside detention facility. But thank you honestly for clarifying
That's
that.
an ongoing.
That I'm happy to.
And there's
And that
strategic
might need to be a
planning are
separate,
things
help me
that
out here, Steve.
are out there in the future that we need to address. I think the work on these conservation dams, it would impact the work of the authority if they were to fail in a huge flood event. It would impact the other projects that the authority has done. But I think the work on the conservation dams is more to reduce the likelihood of them failing through spillway designs or whatever else. So I'm not sure that would ever impact the authority, other than, hydrologists would want to calculate how a spill would impact those projects, but I don't think that is integral to what's going on with the authority's projects right now, if I understand it correctly.
they're related, but they're not really interacting.
Commissioner Cavallis, if you would like, though, we could provide a report out to you at one of the work sessions about the progress on that.
That would be helpful, although I have met, within the last few weeks with the folks involved in in that project. And again, I appreciate both Commissioner Johnson and the county manager clarifying that while there might be some indirect relationship, as has been stated, it's, in some respects, it's, separate issues and doesn't need to be added into this particular objective.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the conservation dams are north of the authority's
Yes, they are.
boundary line even, or 70 or 72 or whatever it was.
They are, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else for me? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, goal 2. So we went out of order because I have the pleasure of monopolizing most of the time today. But so there's, I presented a very high level updates on each of the objectives and then some activities happening under the goal overall. So goal 2, again, is everyone in Larimer County has access to economic opportunities and a vibrant quality of life, and we work together to remove barriers. So for goal 2 as a whole, we are working with all of the municipalities and several community groups to apply for the Census Outreach Grant that was the result of House Bill 19-1239 that has set aside $6 million in general fund at the state level to increase outreach strategies in some of those hard-to-reach locations and hard-to-reach populations, which then drives a lot of the services included in Goal 2, as well as many, many services that the county provides. So we're working to submit that application by September 15th. And then we are also working on a larger business sector engagement plan. So each of the 4 objectives certainly touches the business sector, regardless of what portion of the business sector, but particularly objectives 3 and 4. As we talk about childcare and housing, what is the impact to the business sector and specifically to those employers when their employees can't find childcare or can't find housing? So we're developing a separate engagement strategy to bring business entities to the table to help us think through additional strategies that will fall under those 2 objectives. And then I've included 2 infographics that we've created that just show a different way to represent the impacts of childcare and housing, and I'll actually highlight those when I get down into those objectives. So objective 1 has a deadline for 2021, and that's to adopt a tool that will help us to map and measure community health and well-being across the county. So we have worked with purchasing and IT, and we put out a request for information over the summer to understand what tools are already out there, what is the cost, and then what data do they leverage, both internal and external to the county, to help us do that. And the hope is that this tool will help us to look geographically across the county, will also help us to then narrow down into specific populations or specific topic areas. So we may be interested at some point in looking at the food insecurity of the aging population in Red Feather. Having a tool that helps us to narrow down, again, geographically, population or topic area. So that there is a service proposal that was submitted in order to have that tool operationalized by 2021. That work would have to be funded in 2020. So that service proposal was put in, and we have several tools that I think we can leverage that are already out there that will really help us to do that. That objective team is now sorting through what data points would we want to include. Do we want to include geographic data about where are the floodplains, what do the watershed health look like, in addition to more of the human and economic health data indicators, so that we will be coming back before the board to present some recommendations for how do we define community health and well-being across the county, and then what data would be incorporated in that tool, so that then we could move forward in selecting that tool and implementing it. And we may be coming back to Bridget and her objective, the data sharing objective, to have the implementation of this tool be one of those projects in the future, looking at a way to overlap those. And then objective 2 is looking at employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities, both internal and external to the county. So that objective team has 2 subcommittees that fall underneath it. One is an internal subcommittee that's really looking at how is Larimer County supporting or really even recruiting individuals with disabilities. What do those job opportunities look like internal to the county, and how do we move that forward? And then the other subcommittee is really made up of community partners or external businesses, many of whom already do this very well. So they're looking at more of the external community employment opportunities. And then the group as a whole is planning a lot of activities for this coming October, which is Disability Awareness Month, and having more of a highlight on ability activities. What does it look like to provide opportunities for not only unemployed individuals with disabilities, but how do we also decrease their underemployment, which is incredibly high.
Are you working with the other elected officials in addition to our departments on this one?
Not on this one just yet. Right now it's members like there's ARC, there's Easter Seals, there's Columbine Health, employers who already have very extensive recruitment and employment for individuals with disabilities, but we haven't quite determined what it will look like internal to the county, but I think then the municipalities would be next. And there is representation from Loveland and Fort Collins on the group, but not the smaller municipalities just yet.
Is there representation from our county elected officials?
Clerk, assessor, treasurer, that's what he's asking, I think.
There is someone from the clerk's office. Right now, the subcommittee is Katie O'Donnell, who's the objective leader, HR, and Donna Notter as the ADA coordinator, just kind of sorting through what are the requirements around it. How do we identify someone with a disability without violating their privacy? So still sorting through
Okay. You might
some basic.
You might think about visiting with Angela Myers. She's been doing some work on this area as well, and she can
Yes.
maybe give you some tips on how she's been able to do what she's doing or what she has planned. I think she has a big announcement planned for next month or maybe October. About
on our team is one of our recruiters, and she sits on that team
Okay.
and has been sitting in with Angela too. So hopefully we're making connections with my team that does recruiting and has done a handful of activities with Voc Rehab and with Project Search and a handful of others. So I think Lisa will help make those connections too until the team's ready to expand.
Yes.
Okay, good.
The third objective is increasing access to childcare. So again, there is an infographic that we created. It's the one-sided infographic at the top. It says lack of access to childcare is one of 3 key barriers to workforce recruitment and retention in Larimer County. And it was so a member on my team in Human Services pulled this together and spent several weeks researching all sorts of different data points to figure out which ones tell the best story. And so at the top there, the 75% of the unmet demand for infant care, that is very significant. And a lot of those, that unmet demand has been going up significantly as we've also seen the in-home providers decrease. So we're looking at strategies related to that. And then the cost of childcare is significant. And so on the right side there are 3 lighter circles that talk about just the overall cost that families spend. And the one that's most telling is the 37%. So 37% of a family's income is spent on childcare for 2 children. And that's based on 2015 statistics. I can tell you, having my own child in childcare since 2016, the cost of childcare goes up every year. Every single year, there's the market analysis that's done, and the cost of childcare, whether it's in-home, out-of-home, a facility, a preschool, it goes up significantly. And down at the bottom in that dark green bar talks about what is that overall cost for a family? And it is very likely that families with just one child in childcare are spending between $12,000 and $17,000 per year in childcare for full-time care. So again, just to show a lot of the different information. So this, as we talk about the access to childcare, there absolutely is an affordability piece to it. And so it's, this group has actually, I don't know how familiar you are, but the Talent 2.0 report that came from the Economic and Workforce Development Council had a task force that was created off of that group that was looking at childcare specifically. And I was sitting on that task force, and we've now actually merged the two. So the Talent 2.0 group and the objective team have merged into one group just to reduce duplication of efforts and really trying to be as mindful as we can. So on the back of the update document is actually the steering committee structure for that objective team. So there is an overall steering committee, and that's really the objective team that is taking a much broader county-wide focus. And then there are 4 subcommittees that fall underneath that. So data and public awareness being the first one. We do have great data that we were able to pull for this infographic and for some of the other efforts that we're doing with the state. There's a lot of strategic planning happening in childcare across Colorado, but we have significant gaps still across the county, either geographically, how many daycare spots do we need, and then narrowing down by the age of the child or a family's preference of whether they would like an in-home provider versus a facility provider. There's still significant gaps in the data. And then pairing that with a public awareness campaign. What is the impact to employers? What is the impact to the family? And then all of the other sectors where childcare has an impact. The second subcommittee is funding and affordability. Outside of CCAP, what are all of the other funding options might we look at? How could employers incentivize daycare, or just look at blending funding streams, and then the affordability piece from the family stance that again is absolutely highlighted in the infographic. And then the third is really looking at facilities, codes, and land use. So that one is much more focused on the municipalities, but that group is brainstorming some really creative things as the large retail facilities go out of business because of services like Amazon. What's happening to those buildings, and how difficult would it be, and then how would we fund some of those startup costs to make those facilities appropriate for a daycare provider. So looking at all types of different strategies and working with not only the business sector there, but the fire authorities. There are some very strict requirements around sprinklers in-home daycare providers, things that absolutely put some of the in-home childcare providers out of business, some of those licensing or code regulations. And then the fourth one is the workforce development. On the infographic, there's a quote there from the Talent 2.0 Childcare Task Force that we need 1,000 additional qualified teachers. That's a significant workforce shortage. Even if we had the facilities and the space to care for these kids, we don't have the teachers to then staff those classrooms or those facilities. So they're working with the Department of Labor and DOLA and the Office of Early Childhood at the state level on some really innovative grants in partnership with Ames, CSU, and potentially Front Range.
So did you cover all 4 of them?
What's that?
Did you cover all 4 of them?
No, we haven't done housing yet. Save the best
But
for last.
you covered all the steering committee subcommittees.
The subcommittees, yes, sorry.
So I noticed there isn't specifically a consumer of childcare on there, but I suspect, are the folks that are representing the other entities, are there individuals on there that are consumers of childcare? Because I think that would be an important experience to have represented, I would think. I don't know what this time commitment is for these committees. Maybe a person that's got a kid in childcare and is trying to work and hold down jobs probably doesn't want another meeting to go to or another thing to go to, but
so there's
that's kind of a good perspective to have, I think, since that's who we're trying to help.
Yes. So there are a couple of pieces to that. This objective team is working with the Healthy Larimer Advisory Council that the Health Department has recently created, where they take individuals from all different populations across the county, and they're working on a very extensive engagement plan and a training for those individuals to then be able to serve in an advisory or a policy feedback process. So that's one piece. But then there is a service proposal that was put in for both housing and childcare. There are some great vendors who actually do exactly that. They create or they walk through. Part of a data analysis is to also engage the families who are using childcare to see what is it. One thing, so the Estes Valley did their needs analysis about 3 years ago. And what they found from the 500 families, this vendor reached out to all 500 and actually got about 350 of the families to respond, which was significant. And 70% of those families said, even though I've been able to find childcare, it's not the setting that I want my kid in. So that feedback is also really important to then figure out where do we need to expand the spots and what should that look like. So there is a service proposal that was submitted to do both that in childcare and housing, to really look at from the residents' perspective, the family's perspective, what is their preference in these two areas, so that we're also guiding some of the strategies in that direction, not just brainstorming strategies from the county's perspective without that voice.
And my other question might be for Linda, and you mentioned buildings availability. Is our halfpenny ballot language on the facility question, I don't remember exactly how that's worded, but I know that's a 20-year measure, and if some future board decided they wanted to acquire or, what's the word, not refurbish, but structure a building or something that would be available either as a child care center, I know we don't do that now, but, or maybe a center for county and city employees, is the ballot language flexible enough to allow a future board to get into this area if they decided? I don't remember, does it say the following facilities but shall not be limited to? If it says something like that, I would think that would give a future board that flexibility. Do you remember what the language is specifically enough?
I'd have to look again,
Okay.
but I believe that it names the facilities that would be included. So those are community corrections, alternative sentencing, human services, in veterans, and district/county court. So I would think that if we were embedding at least employee childcare within one of those facilities, that could work, but it is not broad enough to say or other facilities. But, you know, the commissioners are going to consider this language tomorrow. The other thought that I had is, you know, I'm thinking about the Urban Renewal Authority proposal at, you know, along the Max line at Drake and College. This board worked very hard to make sure that there was a housing affordability component to the extent we were able to influence that. But I don't know that we were thinking about childcare. But in terms of conversion of big box, that's a notable one.
I mentioned that at the URA board retreat last week. I don't know
And how
what
did that go?
Yes.
It didn't generate a lot of interest.
Okay.
Affordable housing did,
Okay.
but childcare, I mentioned, didn't seem to generate as much interest as affordable housing, but I continue to work on it.
And I think there's some really great partnerships, that a lot of the affordable housing developments include childcare on the first floor
Yeah,
and then housing above it. So there are a lot of partnerships like that across the state where it is a mixed use.
And,
Good idea.
and an example of what Heather just said, where they're co-locating affordable housing and early childhood, early child care is a proposal up in Estes, Estes
Yes.
Park.
Yeah, I'm
where
aware of
they're
that. That's
considering
really
that.
exciting. That's very exciting for their community.
My question, Heather, and I think we've discussed this, but just to reconfirm it, is in terms of identifying the gaps, we're also looking at the gaps in terms of providing quality child care, affordable child care for children with disabilities, as well as needs outside of the normal, quote, normal work hours. Would you please speak to that?
So that's where one of the most significant gaps is in the data. How many families need childcare for children who have higher needs, whether it's behavioral or physical disabilities, but then also more of the workforce needs around childcare. We've tried doing some analysis of all of our CCAP contracts to see how many providers provide childcare in the evenings, on weekends, overnights, and it's very difficult to even assess how many providers offer that as a service, but then also how many families actually need it. So those are two significant gaps in the data, and then also the more expensive areas of childcare as well.
Is there,
If you need infant care overnight on a weekend, it would be incredibly expensive and probably not easy to find. And then the legislation that is set to sunset this June that allows exempt providers, there are some efforts across the state already coming together to try to get that extended. Because that's really where a lot of the families use exempt providers, either in a family member or a neighbor, to help in those situations.
My hope would be that we're also looking at how we can strengthen what's referred to as the, what is it, the Friends, Family, and Neighbors Network, the informal network of providers, as you just alluded to, yes.
is there one of the subgroups that's working on strategies for employers? You know, Steve mentioned us, you know, potentially ever having our own daycare facility, but I think there are additional benefits that can help financially support or have caregivers come in, or stipend strategies, or like, could employers be doing a little bit, even if they can't come to the threshold of having a facility themselves? Is there kind of a strategy where employers could step up a little bit more and be able to help alleviate some of that stress? Because I'm thinking we may have opportunities we could do at Larimer County, short of having a facility, that maybe we're not doing, and lead that child care initiative.
So they are talking about strategies. One that comes to mind is paid leave right after the birth of a child. So they're trying to figure out where in these 4 subcommittees those fall, because it's a funding piece, but it's also an employer's benefit. So they do have a list of strategies on how to increase that as well.
A lot of the 24/7 operating jobs, you can offer almost like a dependent care benefit, where if they, because you can't care whether it's an adult or a child, actually, if their primary caregiver and their shift is Saturday night, like a deputy, like a community corrections worker, you can't find easy care, and so they provide background checked providers to come in. I don't know, maybe there's an opportunity for my team to help a little more. Let us know.
Yes, definitely. Anything else on childcare?
I think that job sharing is another approach. I think we might be doing that already to some extent internally, but maybe there are ways of scaling that up or making it even more effective.
They do have strategies identified, job sharing from the provider's perspective of if you have, they've identified, so they're working with the Talent 2.0 group because Talent 2.0 has called it the trailing spouses. There's an influx of employees who were coming here for jobs and their spouse comes with them and does not have a job. And so identifying that as a population as well, if you have one parent who's staying home already, could they job share from a provider standpoint with another stay-at-home parent to help provide one in-home daycare amongst the 2 of them, but then also job sharing from the family perspective too?
Thank you. And the last thing I'll say on this that comes to mind is that I think in discussions with the Aging Advisory Council as well as the Early Childhood Council of Larimer County, there have been ideas tossed around regarding how do we, the changing demographic, more and more people that are retired, older adults, and many of those people might be able to help with certain kinds of respite care, or perhaps filling shifts, or perhaps, with the proper background checks and everything else, being able to support some of these after-hours kinds of needs.
Yeah. widening the volunteer pool as well, not just a paid provider pool, but being very out of the box thinking.
Thank you, Heather.
Okay, so for objective,
Move on, Heather. This is excellent work, and this is really, really comprehensive. In thinking about a 5-year time horizon and the amount of resources we have, are the commissioners and you as the goal steward comfortable that you can really bite off this much?
so for both objective 3 and 4, we do anticipate coming back. I've asked the objective leaders to have it ready for most likely the February quarterly update, but we do anticipate objective language changes for both childcare and housing. We're just not sure what it should include at this point because they are both so broad.
Well, I think it's excellent because you've got a very broad amount, diversity of participation here, and that has generated a number of issues, concerns, ideas, possible solutions, and we would love to do it all. And I hope that there's going to be a process to determine either A, is that possible, or B, what would be the priorities if we're forced to choose.
Yes.
Thanks, Heather.
Okay. So for objective 4, I will actually have David help me out with this one. So we have been doing a lot of work on the affordable housing objective. And again, it's really looking at the affordability of housing, both in the rental market as well as the home ownership market. So there are several updates there, as well as the infographic, and then I have this great big map here in front of you as well. So we have, that objective team is very large, has all of the 5 housing authorities that Larimer County has representation from almost all of the municipalities, and then also a really good mix of community entities who provide services within the housing realm. So Jennifer and I have also been doing a lot of research over the last several months to really figure out, first and foremost, what is the county's authority within housing? What is the legal authority for us, so that we can make sure that we're identifying the best strategies and then figuring out how to tackle those. But then also doing a lot of research about what is provided currently within Larimer County, and then also doing a lot of external research, meeting with Pueblo County, Boulder County, Adams County, Pitkin County, the city of Aspen, Douglas County, several other jurisdictions who provide housing services directly from the county to figure out what is it that they provide and to whom. So we have categorized the services that are currently offered in Larimer County as well as other counties in 4 categories, which is what the maps here represent. So this first box up here is development investment assistance. Down on the bottom is ownership assistance. This top one is rental assistance, and then supportive services there on the bottom. So development is really looking at the housing stock. How many homes do we currently have? How many apartments do we currently have? Where might we increase development to actually develop new units if needed? And then more from an investment perspective. That ownership assistance then looks at which of the municipalities or housing authorities provide assistance to people who own their homes. So a lot of those are either down payment assistance to buy a place or home improvement grants that are provided. Then this one here shows which municipalities or housing authorities provide rental assistance. So housing vouchers or down payment assistance, maybe assistance to prevent eviction, but that's really geared towards renters. And then the supportive services is more about the supportive services for the homeless individuals. So we tried to look at all 4 of those categories. And what these maps show, so we have mapped, it's really the green areas that are the most important. So that shows which municipalities or housing authorities provide this type of service in which location. And there's a lot of overlap on who's providing it. But what it shows is that a lot of it is really restricted to the strict boundaries of the municipalities to then determine who is eligible. So the red areas are the municipalities that said, we absolutely do not provide this, but that's just as important as the rest of the pink. So in homeownership assistance, let's say down there on the bottom, it is really only the green areas where those services are provided. So recently joining the LHIP board as it's the Larimer Home Improvement Board that is administered from the Loveland Housing Authority, and I am acting as your designee, the county rep on that board. There are a lot of requests that are coming in from Red Feather, from individuals who own their home, but have they have some type of improvement that is needed on their home in order for it to remain inhabitable. Some of them are mobile home units, some of them are actual standalone homes that they've owned for a long time. There is no assistance that is provided to those individuals. And the difficult part, even through the LHIP board, is that the city of Fort Collins provides homeownership assistance, and their relationship with Housing Catalyst is to provide the rental assistance. But the funding ties back to if you pay property taxes in the city of Fort Collins. So there are a lot of eligibility gaps across the county. So that's really where we wanted to show visually where those gaps are, and it really is outside of really Fort Collins and Loveland. And then there is the Estes Housing Authority, which is relatively new, but they only provide 2 of the 4 categories of service. So again, just gaps, whether you're living in the mountain areas of the county or along the Front Range. And then we've also been doing, David has helped us with a lot of legal research for determining what is the county's legal authority within the housing realm. And what we've learned is that Larimer County actually designated a county housing authority in the mid-'80s, early 80s. But it appears that there were 2 boards that were convened throughout the 80s to govern that, and then we can't tell what happened to it after that. Our understanding from Housing Catalyst is that they were designated as the housing authority at some point, but we can't find that we have that documented to proceed in that way. So we are actually asking for you to consider in that bottom box there on the update sheet, that recommendation, that the county would actually retain that designation internally and then formalize a variety of IGAs or MOUs, whatever they end up being, potentially with multiple housing authorities to offer the larger array of services to the entire county outside of where there is already a housing authority acting.
It seems like that would be wise in helping us get any type of financial assistance if we had a housing authority internally.
I think there is additional community development block grant dollars we could be drawing down, potentially state dollars through DOLA, federal dollars through HUD. It could also open up opportunities for us to be utilizing our current existing community services block grant dollars differently. So I agree. I think it would open up larger opportunities to fill some of these gaps.
Thank you. David, do you wish to add anything regarding the legal authority of the county to retain this designation? And if so, would you be kind enough to identify yourself for the record?
Certainly. David Awer from the County Attorney's Office. I can give you a 30 to 60 second update. And that was when we were first approached, our office was asked, what's the authority of the county to address affordable housing? Statutorily, counties have relatively little authority, but they also have the ability to create a housing authority. So when we started to look at that particular avenue, we discovered that in approximately 1981, a housing authority was established for Larimer County. We found the documents. I should give the credit to the clerk and recorder's office. They found the documents that found the establishment of the Housing Authority in 1981, the establishment of the original governing board. And from there, there's little documentation. As Heather indicated, there is a belief from the Housing Catalyst that they were designated as that governing board. And they've been operating in that manner, but we can't find any documentation that actually formally transfers that. But we also don't have any documentation that continues the existence of the original board whose terms have long since expired. So once we realized the Housing Authority was established, that was good, but we realized we needed to take some formal action to designate who that governing board is. And my understanding is the administration's recommending this particular one, that we go to the default of the county appointing a board.
Thank you, David. Commissioner Johnson, do you have any questions or insights, sir?
I agree with that recommendation.
I also agree with that recommendation. And that being that the county would retain the designation as the Lambert County Housing Authority, and then, of course, there are a lot of details in terms of developing IGAs or MOUs regarding the various, potentially the various housing authorities, in terms of the specific provisions and how we would actually implement some of these things that we feel the county should be involved in. Is that right,
Yes,
Heather?
that's correct. There's a lot more detail to work out.
So if it's the direction of the board and the advice or the recommendation from the group to retain this authority and make that clearer, has there been any thinking about how to communicate this clarification with our partners? Would a letter from the board to each of these existing entities, perhaps citing the work that's been done to research this and expressing some of the desires of the board in making this clarification that may be perceived as a change?
Linda, thank you. I think embedded in your comments were two questions. The answer to the first one is yes. There have been discussions about communicating with the interested parties, the stakeholders like Housing Catalyst, which used to be the Fort Collins Housing Authority. I'm not sure, and Heather, you can correct me or clarify, whether we've come up with specific ideas, such as your second question or point, and that is something in writing from the commissioners explaining the process that we've been going through and the conclusion that we've made at this point. I wonder what you think about that, Heather.
I think communicating that in writing would be the best next step. Jennifer had their last objective team meeting last Friday and gave them a verbal update on where we were at with it, but I think in writing would be the next, that should really go to, I guess we could figure out if we need to tailor it for Housing Catalyst, or is it just a broader communication to all of the housing authorities? We can figure out the best way to do that.
And
It
it might
would-
be good to have some action of the board if we do ever apply, when we do apply for grants and stuff, to have a document that says what we are.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that maybe the group could bring back a letter for consideration by the board. My suggestion would be it would go to all the housing authorities, since we partner with all of them in different ways. And this would be a way of making sure that we're sharing equal and accurate information. And then after that communication has occurred, then the next step would be to actually do the documentation required to either confirm or in some way establish the board's intent of becoming a housing authority.
And yes, to clarify, that's absolutely correct. We're going to have some formal resolution adopted no matter what path the board decided to go down. But our office didn't want to start to draft anything ahead of time without getting some direction. We also didn't want to be presumptuous one way or the other. So we're waiting until everybody's been able to have communication so that everybody's sort of on the same page, or at least understanding why we're on that page before we present anything.
Could this in any way harm Housing Catalysts?
operations, ability to raise money, work that they do? If
So
we, would they view this negatively?
they might.
Would it actually affect them negatively? I think we would word the letter positively. I mean, it helps all housing authorities if Larimer County is going to become more active and involved in raising the issue of housing in the county. I think that can be a win-win.
I agree.
I wonder if they view it negatively. I hope they don't, and I don't think it would personally, but I don't know.
They are an incredibly strong housing authority and have a very strong reputation nationally, because their expertise is significant. So I don't perceive a negative impact to them, because they are such a strong team. But I don't know if they also have been applying for grants under the auspices of being the Larimer County Housing Authority. They don't provide assistance to the rest of the county, so it's so it shouldn't impact their current funding.
Okay.
And I should clarify, my understanding is the administration's hope and intent is to still have an active relationship with them, so it's not to not work with them, it's just expand who they are working with.
Yeah.
Very much.
We should make that clear in any kind of letter. I'm sure you would anyway, but.
And all the more reason to be as proactive as we can be based on the suggestion of a letter, something in writing, and based on Steve or Commissioner Johnson's comments that we need to be upfront and then keep that door open for further discussion, opportunities for collaboration, and listening to one another to, in the end, how can we be the most effective as far as providing resources and services to address the affordable housing problems that we have in our communities?
Yes.
Mr. Vice Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Heather, you've done a great job with the mapping, and it shows where the gaps are at. And it seems like the dialogue that we've had is suggesting that if the county forms an authority, that'll fill those gaps. And yet, I assume that even if you're covered by a housing authority, there are gaps in funding to reach the people in that area.
Right.
And this will not be a solution that solves all affordable housing problems. And do
Oh,
you
darn, I was hoping it would.
So I'm curious that even within those areas that it's covered for the viewing audience, right, is there some kind of gap analysis that's been done as well in
Even where there is
even
coverage.
where there is coverage?
So, so each of these four categories then matches to a more extensive matrix that we've created. So there are several different lines of services included in each of these four, where it goes into a lot of detail, where each of the municipalities and the housing authorities have checked off to say, yes, within development assistance, we provide waivers for some of the construction fees. City of Fort Collins checks, yeah. So there is a lot more detail there that shows gaps within each of these four as well. The piece related to the funding, there will still be gaps related to funding. And so we're trying to figure out one strategy that is coming up quite frequently that we will be reaching out to Commissioner Kafalis on is really related to the mobile home parks that are in the GMAs of Fort Collins, but not paying into the city property tax. And though several of those mobile home parks have been purchased by corporations who are then demanding very quick home improvements be made with significant dollars attached to that. And those residents don't have coverage because they own their unit, but they don't reside within the strict boundaries of Fort Collins. So there are some strategies that will be prioritized more towards the top as we look to the funding, but funding is certainly an issue.
And related to mobile homes or manufactured homes in parks and communities, remind us that in our comprehensive plan, which we adopted in July, it talks about a diversity of housing options. And I think most people would agree that manufactured housing is an example of affordable housing that's, it's not subsidized by the government, and it's an important part of our housing stock. Just last Thursday, I think it was, Mayor Pro Tem Stevens and I were at Hickory Village, meeting in a double-wide mobile home, and it was a very interesting meeting with some of the neighbors about some of the issues that are going on there. And then it was also interesting to read in the newspaper, the local Fort Collins newspaper, that there is a developer that is considering actually building, it would be the first time in many, many years, a new mobile home park, manufactured home community, I believe on the south end of town, southeast corner of Trilby and 287 or College. So that's also very interesting.
And Jennifer and I have, Jennifer Fairman, the objective leader, we've joined the NOCO Housing Collaborative, which is a regional approach. The city of Greeley has created a really great strategic plan that we've been able to get a lot of details on. And so there are some thoughts from Weld County and the city of Greeley as well. But their next quarterly meeting in October is a half-day meeting and is going to focus on mobile homes and just different manufactured home options. So we'll get some additional thoughts there as well.
And in closing on this, on my part at least, just a reminder that this, I believe it's this Thursday, the Colorado Division of Housing and the Housing Colorado Group, a statewide advocacy group, they are doing a training, a session at the, I believe it's at the Fort Collins Senior Center on Thursday, 9 o'clock to 3. At this point, Commissioner Donnelly and I are planning to be there, but that will provide us with some new information about perhaps funding opportunities and other ways that we can leverage the resources to get the job done.
Yes.
That's this Thursday.
And Jennifer and I will be there as well. They've actually moved the location to the senior center because they outgrew capacity at their prior location.
Oh, really?
So it sounds like it will be very widely attended.
Were you going to talk about your infographic on housing at all? I mean, it's fairly self-explanatory. Maybe I should just ask my questions.
Yay.
Yeah,
So this is a two-pager. The first page is really looking at home ownership and what is it, what's the level of income required to purchase something that is affordable? And so as you can see, that very first top part, it now requires an income of just over $91,000 to actually purchase a home based on 2018 data. And that factors in the 3% down and then the 28% debt to income ratio is where they came up with that. And then you can see down that next graph there shows that the number of renter occupied and owner occupied units is actually widening. And we have the renter occupied units becoming larger in number as it becomes more and more difficult to purchase a home.
And specifically, you're referring to renter or owner-occupied units where there's a housing cost burden, paying more. Isn't that what this graph is telling us?
Yes, it's
30% more. 30% more of their adjusted gross income for housing-related costs.
Yes.
So is this graph telling me that owner-occupied units, the percentages of people spending more than 30% is actually going down?
Yes.
That doesn't make sense with the bottom graph that affordability is.
It's because fewer people are actually buying.
Okay.
So the population of owners is actually shrinking.
Okay.
And that's why we need to very carefully consider objective language changes, because when you look at the countywide data related to housing burden, it's right at 33%. But then when you narrow down to different areas of the county, that data looks very different. So the objective language will need to be changed at some point.
Good point, Steve.
But it shows just the overall affordability of housing and the decrease since 2012. And then there at the bottom, the median household income is right at $69,000. But if it requires over $91,000 to purchase a home, just increasingly more difficult for people to buy. So many more people are renting.
So I don't understand the bottom graph compared to what you have in the green at the bottom. I think the bottom graph is the percentage of
So it's looking at the single family versus townhouse.
it's the income the income percentage of as it relates to the median income that you would need. So our
and then differentiating by the type of unit, whether it's a single family home or a townhouse or a condo, and just showing the decrease in affordability over the last 9 years.
I mean, this is really hard to understand. It's the median income is 120% of what's necessary to qualify. So if the number's lower, that means your median income. So now it looks like for single family, it looks like it's like 75. So a median income will only buy you 75% of the single family home. I think that's what that means. And maybe the median income will buy you, it looks like it's 120 some of a townhouse condo. So the average median income, they could afford a townhouse condo, but they can no longer, after January of 2017 or maybe a little earlier, they can't afford a single family home. I think that's what that means. And so that graph defines affordability index by a median income, what percentage of a unit it will buy. But then down at the bottom, you've got a housing affordability index. I'm not sure where this 132 comes from because I don't see that on this graph anywhere. And now you've defined it differently. I think you've defined it with the numerator being the annual income, and I'm not sure how you've defined it down there. Looks like you've divided those two numbers somehow. But is that a different definition than what's in the graph?
It shouldn't be. It should be combining those two, but I will clarify.
I mean, which one? What?
So the bottom bar, the blue, the
Yeah.
green bar.
Are you talking about single family units in the housing affordability index
No,
there?
we should be looking at both.
It's the average of the two, which doesn't look like from the graph is somewhere that looks like it should be around 100. I'm not sure. It doesn't look like the datas are the same. If I'm understanding it right, which I might not be.
We'll go back to that one because that's certain, and it needs a label on the index graph as well. I will clarify
Okay.
that and then
They're really good. Are these PDF available?
They are.
Okay. Because I want
The
to.
backside shows renters.
Yeah, I want to share these on my. After you add that label or whatever you're going to do, can you let us know? Because I really would like to publicize these a little bit. I think they're really helpful. They're very visual and very graphic.
And I appreciate Steve's questioning there, because I also found that I think we've discussed a little bit confusing. So hopefully we can clarify that. And I don't know if it would be helpful where we talk about median household income, the 69,000. I presume we are referring to Larimer County median, because Fort Collins median household income is much higher, and I presume we're talking about a family of 4. And I don't know if there are too many words or if that would be helpful in clarifying. You might want to consider that, Heather.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yes. Yeah, all of these are county.
Yeah.
It doesn't narrow down into one area of the county in particular.
Yeah.
And then on the back, it shows the hourly income based on a lot of the industries that we have, and then overlays the cost of a 2-bedroom versus a 1-bedroom. So you can see the vast majority of
Below that.
our workforce fall below.
Such as preschool teachers, et cetera.
Right. So this is for rental perspective on this side.
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah,
Is there anything else you would like to add?
I think so. Thank you.
I just want to express my appreciation again for an extraordinary amount of work. For the public to understand that with the background that the county manager provided earlier, we adopted the overall strategic plan, I think back in the springtime, and it was based on a lot of input from the community, identifying these 3 overarching goals and then the specific objectives. And then since the springtime, these objective teams have been meeting very diligently to work out the details of some of these work plans so that we actually have something that we can be doing in the next 5 years to accomplish these objectives, which then feed into these overall goals. So well done, and thank you very much. Linda, Madam County Manager, is there anything else that we need to do in this work session?
Not today, Commissioner.
I
Thank
hope
you.
not, 'cause
We
I'm
are
hungry.
adjourned. What's that?
I hope not, because I'm hungry.